Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode. Well, today we're going to talk about a topic that I bring to the table every single season. For this reason, it has to do with our children's identity. Our children are being bombarded with information about their sexual identity at every turn. Sometimes it's in the classroom. Again, it's on social media. It could be porn. It could be pride parades or drag queens in school settings. They are being exposed to so much with regard to their identity. Joining me today is Elizabeth Woning, who's the co-executive director of the Changed Movement. Her personal story is just astounding. She's going to share that with us and also share where that story led her. She's walked through quite the journey, and she has a perspective that I think all of us need today. She is on the forefront of advocacy in California, and we know a lot of things that start in California move across the country. She's doing tremendous work. She's equipping the church. She's equipping parents to prepare us to have conversations and to understand what's going on in the world of LGBTQ+. It's a conversation that we are all having. The statistics are growing. We need to be informed, and she is here to help us. So let's lean in and be informed. Hey, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit. I can't wait to get into all the work that you're doing and how it came about and all the things. But before we do that, I really would love for the audience to hear a little bit about you and about your background, because I think it really frames the work that you're doing. It's a compelling story. So as much as that as you want to share, we would love to hear.
Well, I'll share at kind of a surface level if I can keep it to that. You know, sometimes you jump into your story and then you go down the rabbit hole. So,
I'll pull you back. We'll pull back. Yeah.
I questioned my sexuality as a teen and I had some abusive experiences with men, and then questioned my identity. And then while I was in my mid-teens, met a young lady and fell in love with her. And so she and I kind of grew up together in a sense through our late teens into our early 20s. And that began for me, about 15 or more years of identifying as lesbian or questioning my sexuality. And so I don't want to say from a very young age I knew I was a lesbian. And I don't really think that that's reality for anybody, honestly. Okay. When I think of my own life, I reflect on my childhood and I see all these formative factors, but I really didn't conclude this must be how I am until I was in my 20s. And so I came out and moved into a metropolitan area, lived within the gay culture, and I had grown up in the Presbyterian Church, PCUSA, and really loved theology. And so when I was about 30, I decided that I would pursue a master's degree in theology and went to seminary openly gay within the PCUSA. So I graduated with my master's in theology around 2003. So about 10 years before the PCUSA actually started ordaining gays and lesbians. So just to give a little context of my scenario there. So when I graduated, I wasn't ordainable. And at that time, the Presbyterian Church was moving in that direction and had what they called more light churches, which were more affirming. And so the trajectory of my faith was towards living a single life, but identifying as lesbian. So I left this huge metropolitan area and entered parish ministry just as a youth pastor, an unordained youth pastor, and was in a rural setting and just at the fringe, I would say just at the fringe of the Bible Belt.
Okay.
And so in this rural setting, I was trying to do my diligence as a minister in the community and meet all the other youth pastors and other pastors in the area. and met a charismatic pastor. So we were at, two polar ends of the
Polar opposite,
theological,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And in my settings, in our church, we had the most affluent members of the community. Now, mind you, still a rural community, but the doctors and lawyers came to my church, and so it was much more affluent. His little population were at the other end of the spectrum. And so he was doing outreach among teens, and many of them were homeless.
Okay.
Most of them were impoverished, many abused. This is the polar opposite of what I was experiencing or what I was involved in. And so I became really curious because he had, for the area, a really huge ministry. And so we struck up conversation, and he invited me to go to one of his meetings. And so they held meetings on Thursday and Saturday nights, so as not to conflict with any actual formal kind of church gatherings. And on the night that I went to their service, um, I would say the Holy Spirit showed up
Hmm.
powerfully, terrifyingly for me as a Presbyterian. I think, it was your typical, contemporary music, and then very expressive worship, and a protracted period of worship. Everyone puts their songs up at the front of the of the meeting. And so I'm watching all this happen, and as everyone's worshiping, I start seeing kids starting to weep. Some were overcome with emotion. Some began falling down. Others were laughing. It just quickly became absolutely chaotic, and some were being filled with the Spirit speaking in tongues. I had never seen anything like that before. It was completely foreign. And so, like, I often describe it as a Presbyterian's worst nightmare. It was so completely out of the box.
No
Um,
framework
and
whatsoever. Yeah.
right, here I was, a dignified hymn singing Presbyterian, and but a 17-year-old boy approached me, and he said to me, I believe I have a word from the Lord for you. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks, because I had never heard of anything like that.
Hmm.
In my context, nobody would ever claim that. So I was very curious, like, what do you think you're hearing from the Lord for me? And, upon asking, he proceeded to tell me about some things that I had been praying about for years. So intimately personal things, that were part of my ongoing prayer life with the Lord. And I remember thinking in that moment, is it possible that God knows me specifically?
Hmm.
And if he does, I really have no idea who he is.
Wow.
And so, although I had, all of this academic background, I had never had a direct experience of a spiritual experience like that before. And it really startled me. And so, I wouldn't say out of that experience I was convicted of issues with my sexuality, because at the time I had a really well developed belief in queer and feminist theology. But what it did convict me of was unbelief, which was a terrifying discovery if I wanted to be in full-time ministry.
Right.
And
Right.
so, it caused me to pause. And I began this journey of trying to figure out what had happened. Was it possible that this young man was hearing something from the Lord for me? And what did that mean? What were the implications? And so I started rereading scripture, went through really exhaustive personal study of scripture from cover to cover, and then began asking questions of all of these Pentecostals and charismatic people at the same time, trying to get a handle on what I had experienced. And that journey, which was about, I'd say, a 2-year journey really of discovery, led me down the rabbit hole of deconstructing queer theory, queer theology, and my belief in lesbianism. And so I began questioning what it meant to be a woman in alignment with a biblical view. and I began questioning what life could be like if I could have that level of intimate relationship with God where he was speaking to me as
Speaking
a
to you.
friend. And, meanwhile, I surrounded myself by this group of charismatics who claimed to experience the love of the Lord and to be hearing from the Lord. And so I was provoked to really question everything that I had believed up to that point. And
Can I
ultimately
ask, were
the
you,
out
can I ask you just real quick, were you still serving at, at the Presbyterian Church as you were
um,
walking through all of this?
I continued serving there. So after this encounter for about 8 more months.
Okay.
And so, comically, when I think about it, I would go to my service, which was typically about a 45-minute service, and then I would finish coffee hour and then load up in my car and drive up the street to this little Pentecostal church, and I would park in the alley and go
Wow.
to this
What a
Pentecostal
story.
service. And I started doing that. I found all these kind of crazy little experiential settings, just to question, just to
Mm-hmm.
see, to observe and question. I mean, just to give you a visual, like at the time, I was striving to be very androgynous in affect. I wouldn't say necessarily masculine, like I
Okay.
wasn't trying to be a man because I was kind of strongly anti-man.
Right.
So
Right.
I
Right.
wasn't trying to be a man, but at the same time, I also wasn't. I wasn't. I was really turned. I really could not embrace this sense of my feminine self, and so I was kind of nothing, trying to be nothing. And my head was shaved, and I have some tattoos, and at the time I had a lot of piercings, and so I went to some holiness Pentecostal settings, uh, women in dresses, men with long shirts, and my experience in those settings was so profoundly good. you know um, I knew that I did not belong there, and they knew I was not trying to belong there,
Mm-hmm.
but they also knew I was curious. And so they were very open to answering my questions or praying for me. And honestly, probably by God's beautiful protection, nobody confronted me with, hey, to be in this church, you need to repent from whatever you're believing in. Because it was clear I was not from that culture. And so it was quite a journey. Really, it was a beautiful journey. And I, as I said, I deconstructed all of that, and that's a longer story. Um, Ultimately repented, and then began this journey of figuring out
Hmm.
what were the damages, basically. Like, how am I going to rebuild my life after having believed this for so long
So
and
long
shaped
and
my
so
my
deeply.
life around it? hmm and so, I had no sense of, I'm going to change from gay to straight. That really wasn't my goal. My goal was, I am going to seek to live a biblical sexual ethic, and I'm going to put all of my issues with identity and that into the Lord's hands, come what may. So my conviction was, I'm going to obey Scripture and
Wow.
be single doing it, and whatever would happen. And I had never met anyone who had been on that journey before. And it was a few years later then that I found myself attracted to the man that's my husband now, which I would say at first was, I I would say, humiliating. At first it was humiliating to realize that I had genuine kind of affection and sexual desire for a man. And
Humiliating in that you realized you had been deceived, or humiliating that
I
I
mean,
just can't believe that this is who and what I'm attracted to. Just like the paradigm
well,
was
no, it
just
was more,
so.
yeah, it was more in the okay, this is the house of cards must
Oh,
fail,
got
right?
it. Right.
it's
Yeah.
like I guess I wasn't born gay, and that this is the ultimate truth of who I am, and
Wow.
this is my ultimate, and it's innate and determinative, and it can't change, and any of those things that I had believed
All
foundationally
the stakes
in
that were in the
all this
ground.
other
Yeah.
time, all of that had to come tumbling down when I got ultimately got married to my husband. Now, when Doug and I got married, I wouldn't say I didn't, I was still struggling with same-sex
Mhm.
attraction when I got
Mhm.
married to my husband, but it was, it wasn't the primary in my life. And I would say now in my life, I don't remember the last time that I've been kind of attracted to another woman. So it's not an everyday thing. On the other hand, I don't think it's not beyond possible
Right.
that I
Right.
could have that attraction. But if something like that came up, I certainly would not put it in the camp of, oh, this is who I am. I would
Not
put
an
it more
identity
in the
camp, right?
No,
Not
I
not
would
an
put it more
identity.
in, oh, I wonder what's coming up, because
Mhm.
I really believe that same-sex attraction, particularly for women, um, is more a symptom of something else. It's a
Mhm.
surface level indication of something else going on underneath. And so sorting that out, I spent years discovering what those different issues could have been, or what those prompts were, and exploring with the Lord what it meant for my life. And that journey was beautiful. It means that I know a whole lot about myself, and what some of the major formative factors were for myself as a woman, in my life.
Such a
Is that
powerful
okay?
story. So just beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I just, because of what you're doing now, because of the conversation we're going to have, I just think I love when the passion comes from, and it's evident and obvious that it comes from a personal story and personal pain. And so I think just the audience knowing that that's the starting point is even more powerful with what you're doing and the timing of all of what's happening culturally now. And so tell us a little bit about where that's led you, changed movement, but what was the story into what you're doing now? What was the leap? How did you get here? What is it and how did you get here?
Yeah. I mean, I was minding my own business kind of in the middle of the cornfield in the Midwest, my husband and I were invited to help plant a church in California.
Okay.
And so we took up that offer and came out here. But our original plans to help with that kind of got sidetracked. So we ended up coming to Reading because we had many friends going through Bethel Church's ministry school.
Okay.
And so we came up here to Reading thinking, well, I'll be here for a season and then God will do something else, right? Really never intended to come and stay. But we got here, and the longer we were here, the more we realized we really needed to be here. And so both of us got quite a bit of kind of recovery from. My husband was doing ministry back in the Midwest, so we were recovering from doing that, and then just kind of trying to become normal people, going to church, which is a big leap if you've been doing full time
It is.
ministry, and
It
and
is.
so we just became normal people, and I really completed. We moved out here in 2013, and I would say it was probably another couple of years before I really had a solid sense of my identity today. Like I was in process easily for 12 years
Okay.
after that initial kind of in my face, I think I need to do something different experience that I first described. And so we got out here, and some mutual friends introduced me to Ken Williams. And Ken was maybe one of the first people I'd ever talked to who had a similar background as
Okay.
I have. So, different in the sense of he grew up in a Baptist setting, and in that setting, it would have been impossible to, unlike me, I fully embraced the identity. In his setting, it was absolutely no way forbidden, right? And so kind of quietly struggled within the Christian context before um, realizing he was suicidal as a teenager, and
Wow.
then entering into counseling and going on the journey that he went on to leave the culture, which was very different than my experience. but still this same life experience with sexual identity. And we began getting together with another friend, a third friend, over coffee. And we were so intrigued by what the process looked like for each of us, because it was very different. But some points were the same, like
Mm-hmm.
God's word over us for our identities. We spent so much time, each of us separately, in Romans 5, 6, 7, and 8, just trying to grasp what it meant to be born again, and what the implications of that could be for us. And so after about a year, we decided to start an organization we called Equipped to Love.
Okay.
And Equipped to Love, the focus there was to try to help congregations better understand the underlying issues in the discipleship journey, so that they could provide kind of security for someone leaving that culture. Because for all of us, for all three of us, we found a large key to unraveling same-sex attraction to be in the realm of healthy relationships, not just healthy sexual relationships, but how can I have just a healthy relationship with you, or with
Generally
my,
speaking, what is
generally.
a healthy relationship? And
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, I mean, I think Ken would even say that he calls same-sex attraction an intimacy breakdown.
Mm,
And so how do you
that's powerful.
become vulnerable with other people in a way that you gain your sense of identity through the community that you're in? And so we've always felt that the church wide community is the greatest place of health and healing for someone with our life experience. So we started equipping churches and talking about our life experiences. And after about a year of that, California tried to pass some legislation that would have inhibited our free speech. And so in 2018, California tried to pass essentially an adult conversion therapy ban,
Okay.
framed as a consumer fraud bill.
Huh.
And so essentially
Yeah.
saying, since sexual orientation can't change, any suggestion that it can, or especially that it should be forbidden. It should be considered fraud in California if there's any exchange of money. And so that meant that if we wanted to host a conference, or if we wanted to sell a book or resource like a curriculum, or if we wanted to offer some kind of consulting care, we couldn't do that legally
Not
in the state of
consulting or
California.
therapy in any counseling. Nothing.
Nope, nothing like that. But even just like Ken, a few years ago, published his first book, which is mostly a memoir, and we wouldn't have been able to sell that in the state of California.
Gosh.
So we got involved and ended up working with the California Family Council and many
Okay.
others to oppose this legislation, and ended up sharing our testimonies in most of the committee hearings in the Assembly and Senate. And if you can imagine being in the California
Okay. I
Assembly
kind of can. Yeah. Oh.
and sharing my testimony in a form that a non-believer could understand, it was very exciting. I'll say that it was very exciting. Um, and as you can imagine, people looked at us like we had three heads, and so we found ourselves realizing we needed to prove to them that there were other people like us. And so we pulled together a book of testimonies that we called Changed. And we entitled it Changed because it made the point succinctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we hosted a rally at the Capitol where everyone in the book, so about 30 of us, came together and shared our testimonies live from the Capitol steps. And California Family Council, they live streamed it. And after that, we started hearing from people from across the world who had picked up on this live stream saying, "Oh,
Oh gosh.
I have a story like yours. Me too, right? And you're those changed people." And so we kind of by default we stopped being equipped to love and became changed, because that was recognizable by so many people at the time. That legislation passed in both houses, And then at the end of the legislative season, through the summer, during the adjournment, the primary sponsor of the bill met with several pastors. And so some conservative senators and representatives encouraged him to meet with churches in California. And so he met with some pastors, and honestly, I have to give him so much credit.
I
Evan
mean, that's
Lowe,
miraculous.
he, as a gay man, had experienced so much bias from Christian churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so going into those settings, it was terrifying for him, I'm sure. But some really incredible pastors came alongside him in that season, and then also there were some major court decisions, and all of that together ended up he withdrew that bill rather than pushing it to the governor to be signed. So serendipitously, we continue to be able to sell Ken's book or our book of testimonies and other things here in the state of California. Changed really continues to be in this church equipping space, helping people navigate, individuals who are trying to follow a biblical sexual ethic away from LGBT culture, or churches who want to walk alongside. But we also keep a foot in the policy realm because there are still over 20. There are over 20 conversion therapy bans enacted in the U.S. right now and worldwide. And I mean, I think when someone says conversion therapy, this sense of shock therapy or some kind of torture
force
is what, but really what it comes down to in reality, because these bans can only regulate licensed counseling. They can't regulate, say, pastoral care.
Okay.
But what it comes down to is a Christian counselor may not promote a biblical sexual ethic with a minor in a counseling setting. So that's essentially what a conversion therapy ban is.
Gracious.
And we just heard, the Supreme Court just heard a case regarding a conversion therapy ban in Colorado. And I really think the outcome of that Supreme Court hearing will be a protection for free speech, overturning conversion therapy bans in the U.S. But the effect of those bans has meant that not only licensed counselors, but really many pastors and Christian leaders won't walk with a minor, a young adult, or a teenager who is questioning their sexuality, or help them to unravel it, because there's so much more to the picture than, oh, I guess I'm gay.
Right.
It's just such a complex life experience.
Well, and when you think about that in the context of where we are culturally and what our children are being exposed to at every turn, whether it's, social media or the classroom, the books. I mean, when we think about what our kids are being exposed to and what ages they're being exposed to content that plants seeds before they even can developmentally process what they're learning, to think that then someone can't answer those questions when questions come up from a biblical standpoint is really terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit, that kind of leads us into just what is happening culturally. And so the mission of change is to continue to help equip the church, and parents are mostly the church. Is that kind of your target? Is like anybody who will listen, we will equip you,
Well, we're trying, honestly, I think that in our moment, our cultural moment demands a redefinition of what LGBTQ is.
That's a great point.
Because as you're observing, like, it appears to be social contagion.
Yes.
The effect of progressive culture and, over 30 years of indoctrination. And so this concept of you're born this way and it's innate and there's nothing you can do is pretty well ingrained in culture, even though it's not scientifically substantiated. That's a longer conversation, but there isn't a lot of science that says, oh, this is how you were born. Geneticists, for example, would never claim that.
Won't go there.
They will never go there. And so really, although there's maybe some biological element, mostly it's environmental factors and life experiences, what kind of family you grew up in, not whether your parents are bad actors, just your whole context and how you as a person are interpreting it and all of the pressures that are involved, right? I don't want to be overly simplistic. I think it's super unique per person. And then it also differs between men and women. Like women's sexuality tends to be much more, scientists will call it much more fluid. And what they mean essentially is you can actually track women based upon their romantic interests and connection, bonding. Their sexuality will follow that. And so if they bond and connect most deeply with a woman in a context that can protect or surround that couple as a gay couple, then a woman will stay in that space. If she ends up in a corporate workplace where it's predominantly men, she will actually her sexuality typically will shift in that direction. There's studies that show that. It's much more, really it's typically men who could claim that they have only had exclusive same-sex attraction.
Interesting.
And within that, it's a very, very small percentage of the whole population. The majority of the LGBTQ population, say upwards of 65%, are bisexual.
Interesting. 65%.
Yeah, more than any other of the population. And within the bisexual population, when they partner, they tend to partner in heterosexual relationships.
That's so fascinating. Well, tell us a little bit. There's some other statistics that I think are really fascinating in terms of maybe Gen Z versus millennials and just trend-wise. If a lot of this is environmental, then we've got an environment ripe for all kinds of identity questions, all kinds. So how is that playing out with the LGBTQ, with these ages and stages that we're watching?
Yeah, I mean, when we just opened our conversation before we started recording, we were talking about a Gallup poll that is saying that upwards, I think I've seen 28 or 29% of Gen Z identifying as LGBTQ. And I was, in that same study, which was published at the beginning of this year, the statistic is showing that about 28.5% of women identify as LGBTQ, but only 10.6% of men in Gen Z. In comparison to among millennials, 12% of women.
So 12 to 28. 12 to 28.
Yeah.
In women.
And 5.4% of men among millennials to 10.6. So double, or a little more than double, between millennials and Gen Z. And that the environmental factor there is the outlook in culture, which is more affirming. The effects of the civil rights movement and DEI, and then the reduction of the biblical sexual ethic, biblical morality in culture. So,
post-Christian,
I would say, the move for LGBTQ really is beyond, like when I was in the gay community, really it's, are you same-sex attracted or not, right? What's your sexual preference? But today, I think LGBTQ it's opening really wide, especially when you get into queer identity and beyond. Then it's really just about transgressing norms. It's about transgressing the what we would call traditional sexuality. Anything goes if you place no boundary upon it.
That's right. One of the things that I think is so fascinating, sort of watching all this, and I pay such close attention to what's happening in schools and in education, and what's coming in through the classroom. And when you track some of that and you track what's happening in school board meetings, mostly about pornography, but a lot of it is about the transitioning and the detransitioning and the pronouns and hiding the pronouns and not telling the parents about the closets where kids go change clothes for their identity at school and then they change back before carpool, and just how prevalent that is. I mean, it's a lot. It's happening in many districts. So I watch that. I keep up with it. I follow people who are tracking it very, very closely. And one of the things that I think has been so fascinating to watch is an organization called Gays Against Groomers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And watching, these chapters be formed, and I'm sure you know about them, and you probably, but to me, it's just a fascinating phenomenon, right? That there are chapters of the LGBT community who are standing up at school board meetings without children in the school, right? I honestly wish the churches, people in church without children in the school would show up at the school board meetings, right? But they're standing up saying, this is not what we believe. This is not what we're for. This is wrong. And it's really, I really wonder sort of what your take on that is. I'm sure you know the organization, but it is a fascinating stance to say, to your point, this is what the gay community was, or the LGBT community was at this point, and that's not what it is. We're swinging so far that we're mutilating children and calling that the same thing. So what's been your experience, maybe with learning about that group or knowing that group?
Well, boy, there's so many things that I can say about what we're talking about right now. Where I was saying we really need to redefine what LGBTQ is. This is an example of that, of course, because so we have this growing perception in culture that LGB is now sacrosanct. LGB, you're born that way, but T is an indoctrination, right? And I want to confront that just really clearly.
Yes, I would love for you to.
LGB is every bit as dissociative. Well, I guess I should pause on that. Maybe not as dissociative as T. Because someone who's identifying as trans really does not know whether they are male or female.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very extreme level of dissociation. But if you back up the truck a little bit and you look at your kind of gay, effeminate man, there's a couple of things that we just gloss over. One is, so the level of dissociation is high enough in a gay man that he can completely deny the natural order of his body. Like the procreative function of his body is disconnected from his own mind and his own self-perception, right? So there is a level of dissociation. And then added to that, this common strain of effeminacy that you see among the gay community, which, one could begin to imagine is some level of suspended psychology in an age, maybe from trauma. So you have someone who is ill-formed developmentally in some sense, perhaps, but boy, that could be really, really offensive to someone. So I apologize for that. But I mean, so if you look at the effeminacy and the dissociation that you would see in maybe the gay population, it's not a huge stretch to get to trans. Or for me, for example, I was trying to be super androgynous and I wore only men's clothes. Like I have friends who identified as lesbian when I knew them, who today have transitioned to being trans, because in their minds, it wasn't just that I'm butch, it's that I'm actually a man, that confusion.
Right.
And so there's a high level of dissociative confusion in the experience. And so to say LGB should be naturally protected, but T, we need to do something with.
So fascinating.
We actually need to do a full-scale reevaluation of what is the psychology around these things, what are the unique biological factors around these things. It's really not as simple as you're just born this way and that's how you are Like I did a thought experiment with someone the other day saying, okay, if the LGBTQ culture did not exist and you experienced some measure of same-sex attraction, how would you handle that? Or how
Hmm.
would culture handle that? Likely, culture would handle that in the same way as it handles, say, depression. So if you suffer with clinical depression, um, and so it's somewhat debilitating, right? And you go
Mm-hmm.
to a therapist, and you say, I want help with clinical depression. Your therapist is going to tell you that some things can help, but that it's likely you'll continue throughout your life experiencing bouts of clinical depression. The therapist can't guarantee that you won't experience depression sometime in the future, but that doesn't stop the therapist from helping you understand the formative factors, understand maybe some of the biological factors, and set up a pathway for well-being, right? But
That's such a
yet,
great point.
if you experience same-sex attraction, then immediately nothing should be done to help you, no matter how debilitating. And I mean, we perceive that they are not debilitating feelings, but they can be so overwhelming and guiding. And like I have so many male friends, it's very common for men who identify as gay to struggle with OCD. And so imagine if you struggle with OCD and then it's sexualized, like that is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And yet, what popular culture wants to tell you is that's completely normal, and we need to create a structure around it that facilitates your ongoing identification with these things, and
That's a
and
great
then
that's a great analogy.
and then politicizes it so that there's some element of bigotry or betrayal if you do pursue a change, or it gets legislated so you may not talk about a change. Like boy, we
Yeah.
really need to just raise the barn, if you will, and start again. And a much more, there are so many more humane ways of protecting human dignity than going the path that our culture is going right now.
So that being said, in this cultural moment, what is one of the most pressing needs today
Well,
surrounding?
you know, I mean, I think being able to have this public conversation is really important. There's um, so much ideological influence in science right now and in the medical fields right now. Um, if we could just open up the way to have this conversation, it would be really great. But because of the civil rights movement and the impacts of LGBT politicization, we simply can't. It's not allowed. And so I think one of the key things that we need to recognize right now is just how political LGBTQ is. Like if you've, one of the greatest articulations of this is in Carl Trueman's recent book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And in it, he talks about how LGBT culture actually was formed politically in the civil rights movement. Because it really is, as a unit, it's a an organization of convenience for political gain.
Mm,
Um,
gosh.
because they were struggling for civil rights and rightly pushing against some of the bias and bigotry in society just out of stigma and lack of understanding, right? So that there were good things that came out of the civil rights movement, but one of the bad things that came out of the civil rights movement was the emergence of this LGBT political activist culture that now it's becoming so powerful across the world that it's able to stifle free speech.
Yeah. Yeah. It's taken on a
It's able
life
to
of its own.
redefine family. It's the primary actor in is establishing surrogacy and commodification of children. Like it's pushing what has been traditional boundaries and traditional institutions of family and culture into an entirely newly defined progressive worldview. And it's doing that because of the perception of civil rights. So it continues to use the rhetoric of the 60s and 70s to advance itself politically, and those political advances go far beyond protecting the individual who has this life experience.
Gosh, there's so much to talk about. We could keep going. I'm going to ask you one more question because I think this is really important. When you talk about a generation where 28 or 29% of that generation is identifying as LGBTQ, and you see the social contagion, the leap, there are a lot of parents and a lot of family members who are caught completely off guard with this conversation, like the magnitude of families that are navigating hard conversations that are in the church. Their children have been raised with the biblical worldview. I mean, this is not 3%. This is a third of a generation. Yeah. And so I would love to close by asking you, for those parents or those sisters or brothers or family members that are caught off guard, did not see this coming, have been raised in the church or not, but how do you navigate that initial conversation or the conversations that this leads to when it's so affirmed culturally? Do you have any just sort of final words or suggestions or recommendations?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's such a terrifying experience I have observed from parents whose children are coming home identifying as LGBT, and especially with the T, since there's so much risk involved with that identity for a child's life. If I could encourage anything, it would be to have early conversations with your children. Like, talk about these factors, talk about what's right and true according to a scriptural standard as often as you can, not as a comment on LGBT, but as an encouragement to your child.
That's great.
Then I'll also talk about being embodied, because our postmodern culture doesn't want the reality of our physicality. Like, we don't perceive our identity in terms of our bodies. But biblically, that's how we're viewed. Men and women are integrated in Scripture. That's why the incarnation and the cross are so vital to our salvation. And so, talking about what it means to be embodied. If you have a female body, you're a woman. And if you have a male body, you're a man. No matter, like for me, no matter whether you're rough and tumble or whether you like art and drama, like none of those things are the factors that make you a man or a woman. And having those conversations early so that kids can use the comparison of the right and righteous Christian worldview to measure against the other worldview that they're being exposed to, and letting children know that there is a difference.
Yeah, that's great.
That they're being exposed to something, because otherwise they're just in the soup. Honestly, we all are. We are all just in the soup. It takes a lot of scrutiny really to realize that you're in it. But if your child does come out to you, then I want to encourage parents to ask a lot of questions. Do your best to be in the liminal space with your son or daughter and become the safest place, even if they will not budge on the ideological commitments that they make, remaining as close as you possibly can to help them process what they're feeling, what they're thinking, who they're being exposed to, should they do X, Y, or Z, and what would be the implications. Like, the worst thing I think ever in our cultural moment right now is the disconnect between parents and children.
I would agree.
You're on the East Coast, out here on the West Coast, it's a terrible thing to be a parent or to have parents. Like,
it's an epidemic.
According to the state of California, parents are the worst.
Yeah.
And so it's really vital that Christians actually disprove that parents become the best and safest place for a child to process life.
So powerful. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. I mean, you are a deep well of so much just wisdom. I mean, knowledge and wisdom. And it's a hard topic. And certainly if it's not one that you've personally experienced, it's hard to get your head around it and even to know the questions to ask. And so I thank you so much for your work, but your time today, and for being on and shining a light on some of the things that maybe we haven't considered or thought through as well as we could. And so I appreciate you, and I certainly thank you for being on.
Yeah, thank you very much. If people want to hear more, one of the things out of our kind of California Assembly and Senate extravaganza is the testimonies that we were sharing there. We started publishing testimonies to our website. And so probably the main thing that we've done over these years has been to publish testimonies like mine for people to read and hear, oh, God does do great things in these lives. And then as a result of Charlie Kirk's death, we decided to make our signature kind of church curriculum free. And so we have a free curriculum. It's 5 hours of testimony kind of chunked out in small 30-minute modules. And so you can go through and find a topic and listen to the topic, and it has a workbook. So it's structured so you could take it to a Sunday school class or a quick class and just set it loose and have discussions, or you could do it in your living room, and it's all free on our website. And so,
and what's that website?
Changed Movement. So Change, CHANGED movement.com. And right now it's a big, huge banner. It's the first thing you see when you hit our website.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes and point people. And I have parents. I talk to parents all day, every day, and so I'm thrilled to have a resource to point them to, and appreciate all your work.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, parents, I don't know about you, but I could have listened and listened and listened. I think Elizabeth brought some points to the surface that maybe we're not thinking of, and we wouldn't even have the questions to ask. I mean, it is hard to debate with somebody's testimony, and that story is so powerful, so beautiful, how the Lord just walked her through. But she was open to it, and I think as parents, we have to be open to changing our mind and being corrected and moving in a different direction when the Lord moves. So what a great testimony she shared with us. In addition to that, I think it's so powerful when she says, hey, culturally, and this is an absolute epidemic that I'm seeing when in the space of just family, children and parents that are estranged from one another, the statistics are very, very high. And so when she says, hey, parents, let's be the safest place, even in hard conversations, sometimes it's hard. But that's the mark. That's where we want to be. And often I tell parents, when your kids come home, even when they're younger, and they share something with you that just absolutely shocks you, I kind of call it the lazy porch swing. Just stay steady and listen and rock right through. If you need to go in a room and have a moment or cry or whatever the case may be, that's your true emotion in that moment, have it in a minute. But if you can just stay in the moment and stay steady, and God is steadfast, right? So if we can just stay with them and let them tell us what they're experiencing, walk through it, how powerful is that? I think she was a huge encouragement in that way, and wrapped up, as she gave us a lot of things to think about. And again, free resources. I am so thrilled with these organizations that are putting out resources. They help people, but they help parents. And when we talk about the family being strong, right? We know the enemy comes after family. There's nothing new under the sun. But how he's coming after, it varies sometimes. So these resources, please take advantage of them. Share them with people. We probably all know someone who's walking through an experience right now where they're just caught off guard and don't know what to say. So let's be the church and get each other equipped. I really hope you enjoyed this. It challenged me. I was enthralled with the conversation. And overall, I really hope that this helps you parent with purpose and disciple with direction while you leave an intentional legacy.